So happy to have you with us this afternoon, right here on the Katie McGrady Show on the Catholic Channel, Sirius XM, channel 129. And greetings to all the fine folks who are watching the video of our little opening monologue here on the Katie McGrady Show over on my Substack, which, by the way, you can subscribe to if you just go to katieprejeanmcgrady.substack.com. Or just my website, Katie Prejean McGrady. You can find it. It's basically a blog on steroids, and we're always excited when you join us over there, where we like to post some fresh content and some updates about the show and things that we're talking about and things that you can be involved in. Happy to have you with us on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Just a quick 1-hour show on Tuesdays, and we get to talk about the things that are on my mind. Of course, if you follow us on socials, you already know what's on my mind. Katie P. McGrady on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I tried Dutch Brothers coffee for the first time this morning. A little drink called the Annihilator. I have to say, folks, the only thing it annihilated was my hopes and dreams for a good cup of coffee. I was not a fan. I don't know if it was because it was basically just coffee milk. I don't know if it was because it was iced, and iced coffee, I think, always has lost its concentration or its flavor. And I don't know. I wasn't that impressed. Dutch Brothers is going to have to win me over with something else. I'll just stick to my lovely Nespresso pods from here on out. But hey, Dutch Brothers was disappointing. Hopefully the show is not. You get it? Nice little segue there. All right, we'll just jump right into the actual content of the day, which, the nerdy Katie McGrady, who loves to talk about church history and talk about saints of the day. Yesterday we celebrated the Feast of the Archangels. Today we celebrate St. Jerome. Tomorrow St. Therese. And then the Guardian Angels. 4 feast days rapid fire that don't necessarily have a ton in common. I mean, bookended by the angels, you get grumpy old St. Jerome and quiet as a lamb, dead before 25, wanted to be a great missionary and never left Carmel, St. Therese. Eventually we'll figure out what all 4 have in common, probably later on in the week. But for now, I would be remiss if we didn't spend a little bit of time at the top of today's quick show here on the Catholic Channel, remembering an event 2 years ago today that might have gone completely and totally missed, not have even registered on our Catholic Church history radar, were it not for what ended up happening. I want to make sure I get the dates of this correctly. What ended up happening 586 or so days later. See, on September the 30th, 2023, at about 10 o'clock in the morning, on this lovely September 30th day, Pope Francis, God rest his soul, made the former Bishop of Chiclayo, Peru, Bob Francis Prevost, a cardinal, elevated him to the highest rank of bishop in the church, although at first he was just a cardinal deacon. There are ranks of cardinals: cardinal deacon, cardinal priest, cardinal bishop. You can go back and listen to all of our conclave shows for some rundowns of that. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost was a cardinal deacon upon first establishment, head of the dicastery for bishops, which he only just recently appointed his successor to that particular office, a Naples bishop who has been working in Rome in the office of legislative texts for quite some time, a canon lawyer, not all that different from then Cardinal Prevost. He was elevated to the rank of cardinal on September the 30th, 2 years ago today. And 86 days later, that, by all blush, baby cardinal became our now Pope Leo XIV. And I want to talk for a minute about, on the one hand, perhaps that meteoric rise. To go from cardinal to pope in 586 days is pretty significant. But not just in terms of the meteoric rise. Did perhaps we always maybe know that Bob Francis Prevost was going to become Pope Leo XIV? Were there some signs that perhaps we had missed? But instead, to talk about what Cardinal Prevost was like and who Cardinal Prevost was in his time as cardinal, in his time as prefect of the dicastery of bishops, which perhaps led to his eventual election as Pope Leo XIV. And I'll start by saying this. There were times in the life of Bishop Prevost, so when he was the Bishop of Chiclayo, Peru, and of course before that, had been the prior general of the Augustinians. Before that, a missionary in Peru. So a long ministerial history here of Father Bob, as he was known to the people who knew and loved him. And with him still being in great communication with a number of people, I mean, it's quite common knowledge that Pope Leo WhatsApps people back if they have his number and have been in communication with him before. I don't think that's a security breach in articulating that. People have shared that on the day he was elected, they texted him and he replied much later that evening. So they didn't take his phone. But what was he like as a cardinal? What was he like as a bishop? What was he like as a prior general? There's a story that Cardinal Prevost would occasionally tell, a story that he would tell as bishop, that when Pope Francis became Pope Francis in 2013, when Jorge Mario Bergoglio was elected Pope Francis, that then Father Bob was pretty convinced, oh, I'm good, I'll never be a bishop. Because, and I'll just kind of abbreviate some of the details of the story, but then Father Bob and the then Archbishop of Buenos Aires had a bit of a run-in on a handful of times because of some personnel decisions. Long story short, Archbishop Bergoglio wanted a priest to come work in Buenos Aires, and he was an Augustinian, and Prior General Prevost wouldn't let him go because he was already assigned somewhere. And so there were some disputes. And so Prevost was pretty convinced Bergoglio is now the Pope, Francis is now the Pope, I'm safe, I'll never become a bishop. Now that is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek commentary, perhaps. A tongue-in-cheek commentary, it's who you know, not just your resume, it's who you've shaken hands with, it's who you've collaborated with, it's who you've had dinner with, and in some ways that is a little bit how the church can work from time to time. But I actually think it shows us something else about then Father Bob Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV. That there was this assumption in his mind that despite the fact that he had this great language skill, speaks a number of languages, a polyglot, despite the fact that he had a wide swath of experience in management and leadership, leading literally an entire religious community, having worked within seminary and vocational recruitment, that despite the fact that by all standards on paper, Bob Prevost is actually eminently qualified to be a bishop, there was this immediate humility and almost kind of a tongue-in-cheek assumption, I won't get tapped for the pointy hat. I won't become a bishop. Which means that literally within the past dozen years, Bob Prevost went from prior general of the Augustinians to bishop of a diocese to cardinal working in the Vatican to pope. A dozen years. When Francis was elected, Bob Prevost was still running the Augustinians. And in the time of Bob Prevost running the Augustinians, and then going to Peru to be a bishop, and then getting summoned to Rome to be a cardinal, and then literally being elected pope, and all of that, people who know Pope Leo XIV from his time as belovedly known Monsignor Bob down in Chiclayo, Cardinal Prevost inside the Dicastery for Bishops. Here is a man who never assumed the power lied solely with him. Here is a man who never assumed he was owed a title or a promotion. Here is a man who didn't walk into the room and sit down and slam his notes and demand the attention of everybody while he made a distinct proclamation and declaration. But instead, here is a man who, even though he'd met Bergoglio and they'd had their tiff, he automatically made the assumption, I won't get tapped. And thank goodness for it. I don't have to worry about that from here on out. One of my favorite things the USCCB social media account does is from time to time they post these little Instagram reels of bishops telling the story of when they first got the phone call that they were going to become a bishop. There's always a common theme. They don't quite believe they've gotten the call, or they ignored the call because, who answers phone numbers that aren't already in our phone, and who has the Apostolic Nuncio's personal cell phone number? Well, only the guys who are probably already bishops. But there's this kind of disbelief, this shock. Occasionally, are you sure? A frequent, can I think about it? The response usually being, you can think about it, but you can't say no. And I go back to this idea that our now Pope Leo XIV was fairly convinced in the time of Pope Francis he would never become a bishop, much less cardinal 2 years ago today, much less now Pope, only 586 days after getting the red hat. Now, why am I talking about this? Why am I digging into some of the inside baseball on this? Well, it's because I find that right now, at this precise moment in our church's history, and we are living history right now because this is our first Augustinian Pope, because this is our first American Pope, because this is one of our most quickly elevated to cardinal and then elected popes in the history of the church. Not even 2 years between when he got the red hat and when he became the head honcho who passes out the red hat from here on out. I think we're in a distinct moment in the life of our church with attention on the Pope. Part of it is our media ecosystem. Part of it is the fact that you can see what the Pope does every single day. Part of it is the idea that the Holy Father so much as sneezes the wrong way, or in the case of Francis, goes into the hospital, and we very closely watch for the medical updates. The Holy Father blinks or winks. The Holy Father pats the head of a child who escapes as he's leaving the Sunday Mass, and he's able to give her a little boop on the nose. That's the picture that went viral recently from just this past Sunday's Mass at the Jubilee of Catechists. The Holy Father can't so much as scratch his nose without the entire world knowing about it. So part of it is the media ecosystem. There's this availability of viewing of the Pope, and so therefore there's this interest. But I also think it has something to do with who Pope Leo, formerly Robert Francis Prevost, named a cardinal 2 years ago today, part of who he is. What some might call the vibes, the aura of the Holy Father. A man who never assumed he would be named Pope, in fact, joked that he wouldn't get the bishop's hat. A man who, when he got the summons from Pope Francis to come to Rome to run the dicastery of bishops, politely said, I don't really want to. Politely articulated that wasn't really on his priority list. Mostly because he liked being in Chiclayo. He appreciated being a missionary bishop. He appreciated the work that he was doing, always wanting to get back to his Peruvian ministerial roots, and yet obeys and answers the summons, and then becomes one of the most influential cardinals inside the Vatican. We know that he had Saturday morning breakfast with Pope Francis. There's a great little anecdote in Christopher White's book about the election of Pope Leo XIV, where he talks about how, Pope Francis was notoriously early to his meetings, and so they had a running gag where then Cardinal Prevost would try to arrive earlier and earlier each time to beat the Holy Father, and he never was able to because Francis was always first. A man who just a week before Pope Francis went into the hospital was elevated to the rank of Cardinal Bishop. And all that really meant was that when an eventual conclave arrived, Cardinal Prevost wasn't in the hundreds to vote or to walk up there and give his oath of fidelity to the process, but was instead fourth, right behind Cardinal Tagle. And in that ranking, which at the end of the day doesn't really matter all that much, Cardinal Priest, Cardinal Deacon, Cardinal Bishop, suffice it to say that it's pretty evident that Francis had his eye on Bob Prevost, even if Bob Prevost thought, I'll be passed over. Happily so, in fact. Now, I'm talking about all of this because with all of this media attention, with all of this fascination, with all of this looking very closely at who Pope Leo XIV is, we can also look at who Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost was, becoming the cardinal 2 years ago today, like we've been talking about. And of course, at this consistory mass, so when a man is elevated to the rank of cardinal, there is a special mass, and obviously he goes up and the Holy Father puts the red hat on his head. Well, Pope Francis gave a homily. And Pope Francis gives this homily on September the 3rd, 2023. And he says something in the homily that I think we can actually use as a bit of a North Star in understanding what Pope Leo XIV is doing as Pope. 2 years ago today, as he's summoned to Rome to lead the dicastery for bishops, as he gets this red hat, which symbolizes a massive elevation in his standing in the life of the church. You get the red hat, chances are you know you're voting in a conclave someday. You get the red hat, chances are you could be the Pope someday. And here's a man who was fairly convinced he would never even become a bishop. He heard Pope Francis say in that homily the following. As he's describing the role of the cardinal, as he's talking about what a cardinal does. He's talking about the way that the apostles of today, our bishops and our cardinals, are able to step out into the world and be in and among and with the people. He said this, indeed, we are evangelizers to the extent we cherish in our hearts the wonder and gratitude of having been evangelized, even of being evangelized, because this is really a gift always present that must be continually renewed in our memories and in our faith. Evangelizers who have been evangelized, not functionaries. Recently, Madonna, yes, the Madonna of all the music. I'm trying to think of another song that Madonna sang other than Like a Virgin, and none are coming into mind. I know there's this one song, hey, Mr. DJ, turn the music up. I want to dance with my baby. Welcome to the Katie McGrady Show, where I poetically quote Madonna. Either way, I can't think of any Madonna music right now, but Madonna, the Madonna, not our beloved Blessed Virgin Mary Madonna, but Madonna, the pop singer. How old is Madonna even now? I don't exactly know. Madonna recently got really mad at the Pope because she said the Pope needs to go to Gaza. The Pope has to fix all these problems in the world. That's his job. And the Holy Father literally said in an interview, it's not my job to fix the world's problems. And one might sit there and think, well, what is the Pope's job if not to fix the problems of the world? And Pope Leo told us what his job is. He's not a functionary. He's not just a head of state. He's not just a figure who wields power and demands the authority and the views of every single person to enact his agenda. His job is to preach the gospel, is to be an evangelized evangelizer. Which means that when we watch what Pope Leo XIV has done, will do, and hopefully his very long time as our Holy Father, that evangelizers who have been evangelized, not functionaries, those were the marching orders Leo XIV received 2 years ago today when he became a cardinal. And were certainly words that echoed in his mind in the short year and a half that he was a cardinal. Certainly words that we know had guided him, even if they hadn't yet been spoken. This idea had guided him when he was leading the Diocese of Chiclayo, certainly had been his North Star when leading the Augustinians as prior general. This is a man who has been a leader. This is a pope who didn't just get plucked out of obscurity. No, most of them weren't obscure figures to close church watchers, I should say. Just because the world might have been surprised by Bergoglio becoming pope, those paying very close attention were not. But Leo XIV, truly a bit of a shock to the system, people not necessarily anticipating the American could ever win at all, an evangelizing evangelizer who has been evangelized, who recognizes his responsibility in his job as not functionary and manager, but as witness to the gospel. I think this is no more evident in the life of Leo XIV than when we see him actually riding around in his Pope-mobile. Pope Leo can deliver a beautiful homily, and he can certainly rev up a crowd with his reflections at the Wednesday audience, but something changes in his demeanor when he pops into that Pope-mobile and starts driving around St. Peter's Square. Something changes on his face when he kisses the baby or shakes the hand of the person who was so excited to meet him. There's a warmth that is immediately palpable and evident because this is a man who knows my job is not functionary. It wasn't functionary when I was a cardinal, and it's certainly not functionary now as Pope. But it is an evangelizer who has been evangelized and who now occupies this primo position to be able to give witness to what? In the words of Francis, the joy of the gospel. To recognize that in the ways that we have been catechized and evangelized, we can give a profound witness, not just with our words, not just with our deeds, not just with what we do, but in who we are and how we love. And so I think if we are to look very closely at Leo XIV, the surprise that we might be waiting for, the fixing of the world's problems that people might anticipate this Pope would take on, no. We should instead be looking to see what evangelistic witness is he going to give, not as a functionary, but as one who knows Jesus Christ most intimately. Now, I think there's something quite beautiful about being able to consider and to contemplate who Leo is going to be, not just in light of what happened maybe 2 years ago when he became a cardinal on this date in 2023, but also who Pope Leo is in light of so many popes who have come before. To that end, I want to tell you about a project that I got to be a part of. You know, I think there's something really quite cool about being invited to do something that nobody else has done, that nobody else created. In the wake of Pope Leo XIV being elected, there were a ton of rather rapidly written biographies. I got to contribute to a book about Pope Leo XIV with my friends over at Ascension Press, When the White Smoke Clears. But I also got to work on another project from my friends at Ave Maria Press, a little book called Praying with the Popes. Words of Hope and Peace from Leo XIII to Leo XIV. I got to write the introduction to this book. And this book is not a biography of these past dozen popes. It is instead a look at things they wrote, things they preached, comments and remarks they offered occasionally on their travels, a snapshot into their papacy by way of what they evangelized with, not as functionaries, but as evangelizers who have been evangelized. The very same marching orders that Leo XIV got 2 years ago when he became a cardinal, I actually think are words that have guided all of our popes before. And so this little book, Praying with the Popes, Words of Hope and Peace from Leo XIII to Leo XIV, compiled by Eileen Ponder and Shannon Schmidt, who put together all the incredible writings of the Holy Father, and I got to contribute and write the introduction to this little book. It's available now from my friends at Ave Maria Press, but my friends at Ave, they knew I was going to be talking a little bit about Pope Leo XIV and talking a little bit about maybe what we can expect from the Holy Father and in light of the things that have come before our Holy Father. And so they said, hey, we want to give away 5 copies of Praying with the Popes. So to our radio listeners, if you call in right now, the first 5 people to call in, 888-322-8465, you're going to get a free copy of Praying with the Popes. It'll be shipped directly to you from Ave Maria Press. Give us a call, 888-322-8465, right here on The Katie McGrady Show, 888-322-865. If you want to win a copy of Praying with the Popes, Words of Hope and Peace from Leo XIII to Leo XIV, a brand new book that just hit the warehouse at Ave Maria Press, you can give us a call at 888-322-8465. The first 5 people who call in live on the show right now will have a chance to win Praying with the Popes, a copy mailed directly to your house, 888-322-8. First 5 people who call in, you're going to give your name and your address to my producer, who will write it down and will get these little books shipped out to you. Praying with the Popes, Words of Hope and Peace from Leo XIII to Leo XIV. Now, let me tell you, when we consider and think about what will perhaps come in the papacy of Leo XIV, and I've talked about this before, as we celebrate the 2 years since he became a cardinal and the next 586 days as he was a cardinal, and then we got him as Pope on May the 8th. The 2 things that I have been very closely paying attention to with Pope Leo are this. Firstly, what's the first thing that he's going to write? And I think the first thing Pope Leo will write will certainly reflect his heart, as is often the case with the First Apostolic Exhortation and encyclical. But one thing that Pope Leo has consistently brought up is his concern about technology and AI and the dehumanization that often happens because of screens. I don't know that we're going to get an entire encyclical about artificial intelligence, but I wouldn't be surprised if this concern surrounding the dignity of humanity is not at the top of what we will see from him. An evangelized evangelizer giving witness to the world about needing to remain close to the human, even as technology at times gives us the illusion of connection. The other thing I'm very closely watching, and I've talked about this a little bit on the show before, this is the nerdiness in me. Pope Leo XIV has appointed a lot of canon lawyers. He's appointed a lot of canon lawyers. And in appointing a lot of canon lawyers as bishops inside curial positions, I think he's showing us, in a very clear and distinct way, a focus on the norms and structures and functions of the Roman Catholic Church being important. Not these are mere functionaries, but acknowledging this idea that there's an operational system inside the Vatican, there's an operational system inside the way our church runs, and putting people in place who have a resume to back up knowing those structures, knowing those systems, only helps the church thrive. She can be pastoral because she is ordered. An evangelized evangelizer can evangelize beyond just being a functionary because they understand the functions. And so, in waiting to see what he will write, and in watching very closely who he elevates and appoints, we're getting to know Pope Leo XIV. And you can continue to get to know Pope Leo XIV, and you can, I think, in a lot of ways, continue to appreciate what's coming by looking at the shoes of the fisherman that he currently occupies, and maybe learning a bit about the men who came before. Praying with the Popes, the book that I was able to write the introduction to for my friends at Ave Maria Press, is available now. You can grab a copy from AveMariaPress.com. If you use code KATIE15, it gets you a little bit of a discount, and you can pray with from Pope Leo XIII to Leo XIV, and perhaps recognize that all of our popes, have not just been functionaries, but have been evangelized evangelizers, have been witnesses, have been able to give us a beautiful understanding of who Jesus Christ is, each one unique and particular in their ministry. So grab a copy of Praying with the Popes. And oh, hey, by the way, tomorrow, starting over on my podcast, Ave Explores, a brand new 5-episode series on Praying with the Popes, completely for free. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you go to AveMariaPress.com, you'll find the book, you'll find the podcast, and of course, you will more fully understand and appreciate our evangelized evangelizer, who is our now Pope Leo XIV. We're going to take a quick break and then come on back. I mentioned earlier that today is the feast of St. Jerome. Angels yesterday, the little flower tomorrow, but today goes to the lion himself, the grumpy old St. Jerome, who translated the Bible. We're going to tell his story in just a few minutes and why his work years ago impacted your faith in this very moment. So stick around for more of the Katie McGrady Show right here on the Catholic Channel, Sirius XM, channel 129.